A very good morning to one and all. I, Srimani Swapna, Assistant Professor of English, welcome you all to the National Webinar on Language Competency and Critical Thinking, organized by the English Department of Badruka College of Commerce and Arts. I now request Mrs. Anupama Ma'am, Associate Professor of English, Vice Principal, and also convener of the webinar, to give her opening remarks. Over to Anupama Ma'am.
A very good morning. Once again, I take pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar on language competence and critical thinking, organized by the Department of English, Badruka College of Commerce and Arts. We are glad that we have come up with another webinar in a week. Today, we are honored to have with us Professor Sunita Mishra ma'am, Professor, Head, Center for English Language Studies, University of Hyderabad, as our resource person. We welcome you, ma'am. Before we move ahead with the session, I would like to say that in the present technological era, the students are expected to think critically so that they will be able to adapt themselves to the changing technology and improve their employability skills. Since language is an important tool for gaining knowledge, it is therefore essential for the students to gain insight into the nature of critical thinking ability. Hope today's session will help us to help our students. And I wish that Professor Sunita Mishra ma'am will enlighten all of us with knowledge and throw on the possible link between language competence and critical thinking. I thank our Honorary Secretary, Sri Mukundlal Badruka ji, and Director General, Professor Abhirama Krishna sir, for their support at every step. And I congratulate the Department of English for organizing today's webinar. Once again, I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants and looking forward to having an informative and enlightening session. Thank you. Now I request our Director General, Professor Abhirama Krishna sir, to say a few words.
Thank you, ma'am. Morning, everybody. I'm extremely happy to be associated with this webinar. At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Sunita ma'am for readily agreeing to share her thoughts on what I believe is a very, very important subject, which will be of great interest to both the faculty community as well as our student community. Seth Gasiram Gopikishan Badruka Educational Society was set up a college first in 1950. So this year, 2020, is a landmark year for us as we celebrate the 70 years of our existence. In fact, we are celebrating the Diamond Jubilee. The last 70 years, the management as well as the faculty have been engaged in creating an enlightened, spiritually inspired, morally upright, and socially committed citizens. We owe to a large number of progressive management, philosophers, philanthropists, corporate leaders, and well-known educationists who have guided us in the past and who have continued to guide us even in the current times. I'm very happy that the English Department of Badruka College has chosen this topic, and I'm sure the webinar would not only be interesting, but very informative. Best wishes to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now take the privilege to introduce our resource person for today's webinar, Dr. Sunita Mishra ma'am. Dr. Sunita Mishra, Professor and Head of the Center for English Language Studies, School of Humanities, University of Hyderabad. She is a faculty at the Center for English Language Studies, University of Hyderabad. Presently, she is working on Critical Pedagogy and History of English in India. Her major publications are in the areas of teaching communication skills, politics of language, and history of English in India. Madam, we welcome you and are very glad to have you here with us, ma'am. Now, I request Dr. Sunita Mishra, ma'am, to kindly give her presentation and enlighten us with her talk. Over to Sunita, ma'am.
Clearly audible? Am I clear? Is my voice clear? Hello?
We are able to hear you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you everybody for inviting me to talk in this forum, and thanks for introducing me also. I basically teach English language studies at the Center for English Language Studies at the University of Hyderabad, and today I'll be talking about critical thinking and language competence. I have a few points which I would like to corroborate in this discussion for today. First, I would like to talk about the nature of critical thinking. To do this, I'll be primarily taking up Bloom's taxonomy. All of you have, I'm sure, heard about it, looked at it, been familiar with it. Yeah, I have my problems, which I'll also discuss during my talk with the Bloom's taxonomy. But nonetheless, it is a very useful tool to assess, to understand, and to present critical thinking to students and researchers. So I'll be basically looking at the basic nature of critical thinking. I'll try to link this concept of critical thinking after that to Canan and Swale's concept of language competence. Now, this came up in 1980s, and it was a kind of a reaction to Chomsky's concept of competence versus performance. I'm sure, again, this is a concept which most of you are familiar with. Chomsky talked about language competence, the concept of competence as an inbuilt concept, which was inherent in the mind of the native speaker hearer. Delheims, before Canan and Swale, took up this concept and they basically made it a socio-cultural concept rather than something which is inherent in the speaker's, native speaker's mind. So Canan and Swale's model of understanding language competence again is very important. They talk about three kinds of language competences. They talk about grammatical competence, they talk about sociocultural competence, that is communicative competence, and finally they talk about strategic competence. I'll try and link Bloom's taxonomy to what language competence means in these three kinds of competences. I'm trying to build up a kind of a network between the two of them. To do this in the process, I'll be talking about different kinds of language teaching syllabus which is evolved based on the three kinds of language competence. Now, when we look at our syllabus, it is mostly a mix of all the three. But we also have syllabuses which are geared to one of the three. We'll look at a few of these during our talk. And finally, I'll try and go, if there is time, to other implications of critical thinking. The implications for language, implications for literature, and maybe, if possible, I'll briefly touch upon the concept of critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy is something which was talked about primarily by Paulo Freire, and it has been taken up in a major way by people since then. I'll begin by talking about nature of critical thinking. Critical thinking, as we all know, is basically the ability to reflect, to interpret, to evaluate, and to judge. And I always insist that critical thinking is not something which we have to teach people. Each of us do critical thinking every day in our day-to-day life. It is part of our everyday life. All of us do critical thinking, be it in a presentation like this, be it in a seminar, be it during online teaching, or be it in a kitchen when you're trying to cook up a dish. You have to reflect, you have to interpret, you have to evaluate, and you have to judge. It forms part of our everyday life, which has to have application in anything you do: cricket, cooking, uh, teaching, anything, teaching language, teaching literature, anything. It basically helps us to make assumptions, understand implications. It helps us communicate effectively. And it also is a great help in our problem solving ability. Critical thinking has been talked about a lot in the concept of management education, in the concept of technical education. Of late, humanities also have been talking about critical thinking in the context of language and literature teaching. But again, I will stress on the fact that critical thinking forms part of our everyday life, and each of us get involved in critical thinking every day without knowing that we are doing critical thinking. The only challenge for the teacher is bringing out this aspect into the classroom context, and teach students how to link this aspect of critical thinking to the academic studies which they're trying to do. And that is where I feel Bloom's taxonomy can be of some help to us. Bloom's taxonomy, I write revised over here because it was slightly revised. The number of skills remain the same. I think the last one is getting somehow, it is camouflaged by, it is covering the band over here. But what comes in the beginning is recalling, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. Bloom basically thinks of critical thinking as a kind of hierarchical arrangement, and he divides them into higher order thinking skills and lower order thinking skills. I have my personal problems with that. I feel concepts like understanding and applying also can have implications for evaluating and creating. So for me, this kind of a division can be problematic, but nonetheless, it is a useful division where you recall, you understand, you apply, you analyze, you evaluate, and you create. Now, understanding it in this way is very useful for the language teaching in the classroom. When we do language teaching, you must have seen we sometimes take up material to the classroom which stresses on recalling. We give a material, we do listening comprehension, we expect students, and after that we pose questions. We expect students to recall what is there. We do writing comprehension. Before that, we might have given them some reading component. In the writing, we expect them to recall sometimes. Apart from recalling, in fact, recalling becomes easy if there is understanding. So we expect students to understand the organization. We expect them to understand the link between one concept and the other. We sometimes expect them to understand why what is important in certain contexts. Like, for example, choosing what is the topic sentence, choosing what are the main points which have been made in a paragraph, choosing how the introduction has been done, understanding how the introduction has been done or how the conclusion has been done. All this forms part of understanding. Now, you read about a concept, you have to apply that concept to some other. You come across, you give the students a theoretical framework, and then you ask them to apply it to a certain kind of writing. Simply, very simply, to put it very simply, you give them the main, the structure of writing an essay, or the structure of writing a paragraph, with the topic sentence, the main supporting sentences, and the concluding sentence. And then you give them a topic and you ask them to write a paragraph along those lines. There, application becomes important. Finally, again, we can ask them to analyze things. What have they written? Is it right in a certain place? Could it have been done differently? Could something else have been more important in that place? Things like this become part of analyzing. Evaluating becomes very important when it comes to any kind of writing or reading. I'm reading a certain essay about a certain topic. What kind of stance that essay take on the certain topic? Is it talking about one way of looking at the topic, or is it giving you the pros and cons and taking a very objective view of the topic? Is it trying to lead you into a certain kind of thinking, or is it laying forth in front of you the pros and the cons, the different points, the different factors involved in the topic, and asking you to make a judgment? What kind of argument is being put forth in a piece of writing? That would form part of evaluating. Creating becomes very important when it comes to understanding and teaching critical thinking. Creating exercises can be given by, like for example, you give a small essay and leave the final conclusive part of it and ask students to create their own conclusion. Give a small piece of a short story, for example, and ask them to create an ending or give a different ending. Give students a kind of an essay which has a very strong point of view, which has a very strong perspective, and ask them to create an essay on the same topic with the opposite perspective. All this can be part of exercises which help them create, which help them think. But remember, even as they're creating, for example, this last example I gave, when you are giving them an essay or a piece of writing with a certain perspective, and you're asking them to write one more with other perspectives, they're also evaluating, they're analyzing, they're also understanding. So that is why I feel even when they're doing one kind of higher order thinking skills, that higher order thinking skill to become effective involves all other thinking skills also. Similarly, a lower order thinking skill like understanding will in a major way involve evaluating. We cannot understand without evaluating in it something. We cannot understand without analyzing something. In fact, sometimes even recall involves analysis, involves evaluating. We recall things better when we analyze it in a certain way, when we evaluate it in a certain way, and we place that item in a certain scheme, which will make it convenient for us to recall, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate. I think a good learner of language does all the things together. It's not that we first do the lower order thinking skills and then do the higher order. I think all of them happen together. And that is the beauty of learning, where we think we are teaching certain skills, but without our knowledge, we are also teaching many other skills. Right? I'm sure as teachers, all of us have gone through this experience where we think we're teaching them only to recall, but without our knowing, we're even teaching them to analyze and to evaluate. It's not possible to teach in watertight compartments. It is not possible to teach one skill and not teach another. That is why I feel critical thinking is a complete package, or thinking is a complete package which comes with any kind of language learning process. However, very often we do have different kinds of syllabus structures which focus on some or the other language competence. Now, as I had told you initially, Canale and Swain have talked about language competence extensively, and their division of language competence into grammatical competence, social linguistic competence, and strategic competence has gained a lot of currency. And it is supposed to be one of the very well-known structures which has helped people structure syllabus, which has helped people structure tasks which are given in a syllabus, etc. Briefly, I thought I can look at these concepts. Grammatical concept of competence primarily means understanding. It would maybe very roughly fall in the category of understanding and remembering, which would form the base, I would call it the base of the critical thinking skills paradigm which Harold Bloom talks about. The main purpose here is to know the grammatical roots of the target language, and this is dealt with by structural syllabus types. I'm sure you people have seen the Renan Martin book, the Nesfield book. They primarily talk about the structural syllabus types, where you give the structure and you ask people to remember. It is taught by grammar translation method and sometimes through direct teaching method. Direct teaching method also goes on to other things, but primarily it is grammar translation method that helps us deal with structural syllabus, and also the kind of syllabus which has these kinds of tables which we are supposed to, we are supposed to put one thing instead of the other, substitution tables, and we go on teaching where language items get we keep substituting language items and keep repeating. Now, when you think in terms of language teaching, we have two major kinds of syllabus structures. We can have a product-oriented syllabus, or we can have a process-oriented syllabus. This definitely will fall into the product-oriented syllabus, where at the end of the learning, you expect students to have a learning outcome, a clear learning outcome. You expect them to learn the tenses. You expect them to know the prepositions. You expect them to know certain synonyms and antonyms or articles, which article has to be used in which place. And the stress here, as you would agree and see, is on correctness, on accuracy. I'm talking about accuracy as against fluency. Fluency does not stress on accuracy, but accuracy means it expects everything to be correct the way it has been taught to us. Social linguistic competence is the next kind of language competence they talk about, which again I would very roughly put into the middle kind of place of Bloom's taxonomy, that is analyzing and applying. Social linguistic competence has primarily been the focus of the functional syllabus. Some of you might even understand it as the notional functional syllabus, which came in when the market abroad, when people had to go market, when English people started having market relations with other places, and they had to start learning how to talk in certain contexts. This was also in a certain sense linked to English for specific purposes. Like for example, we have to talk for a certain purpose, and we have to be trained to talk in the way that is necessary to talk for that purpose. So we had syllabuses coming up which will teach nurses how to talk, which will teach people how to function in a marketplace, or people how to talk in a BPO, where you I'm sorry, yeah, or in an office situation, what exactly is necessary and how one can go about talking. This becomes part of a functional syllabus. Here we are basically teaching real world language, and it is taught by situational language teaching and communicative language teaching. Now, when we talk about communicative language teaching, it's a vast array. We have many different kinds of communicative language teaching. It is very difficult to narrow it to only one kind. And roughly it has been divided into weak version of communicative language teaching and strong version of communicative language teaching. This notional functional syllabus, I think, primarily caters to the weak version, where you are given dialogues. You are given situations, you are given the necessary vocabulary that you will need in a certain situation and the sentence structures that you will need in that situation, and you go about completing the dialogues. You go about learning the language for that specific purpose. Like for example, you agree, you disagree, you apologize, you request, etc. Of interest is the strategic competence, which would probably be the most difficult aspect to teach when you are teaching a second language. Um, I would place it at somewhere around evaluating and creating. And the strong version of the communicative language teaching syllabus generally caters to this kind of competence. Remember here that unlike the previous two, the learning outcome is not product based. It is not what you learn at the end and what you have learned at the end which matters, but the process you of going through the experience of learning, which becomes important. That is why Prabhu, N.S. Prabhu, I'm sure again most of you have heard about him. He extensively talks about task-based teaching. And there he talks about three kinds of tasks. Tasks which have information gap, tasks which have reasoning gap, and tasks which have opinion gap activities. Now, I think information gap can roughly fall into the previous communication skills competence maybe, but reasoning gap and opinion gap would definitely fall into this strategic competence where it becomes easy for a person to reason out, to give opinion, to draw conclusion, to evaluate, to create a perspective, to emphasize on a perspective, to negotiate a perspective. I think all this forms in this category. It becomes necessary to learn language of a certain kind to be able to do these kinds of activities. Now, I would again stress that while doing these activities, insisting that the students use only English does not work. Maybe what will work is we allow them to bring in their mother tongue, bring in the languages they're familiar with into the classroom. Start using those languages, learn how to reason out, how to evaluate, how to form an opinion, how to create a perspective. Partly in English, if they're uncomfortable, allow them to bring in the mother tongue, and maybe gradually over a period of time, one can make them shift into English. Another important factor over here is we do not stress on accuracy over here. What we stress on is fluency. So it is very important to let students talk. Let them commit mistakes. Let them say things which are grammatically wrong. But at the end of it, the teacher should be able to maybe take it as a kind of a post activity where you correct their mistakes, take their problems which they have in their language, and sit with them separately about with that. But that is less important than enabling the student to start reasoning, to start giving opinion, to start communicating. That will become the focus of the teaching process here. Uh, this is one part of teaching strategic competence and teaching critical thinking, which is very important over here. One has to have a lot of critical thinking abilities. I would slightly move away to another aspect of critical thinking, where critical thinking can also help us analyze language, question the accepted views, and offer alternative perspectives during language analysis. One important part of it is also unpacking ideology and explaining the biases in language if you find them evident in the language. Open the newspaper every day, and depending on who the publisher is, you will find a certain kind of a bias in the newspaper. I have given a few examples, and these kinds of biases are expressed through language. So when we are teaching language, it is very important for us also to also make the students conscious that a language has a bias, a language has a perspective, and they should be able to understand the bias and the perspective and then take a decision as to what they want their viewpoints to be. I've just given two very small examples over here, like the use of the passive. The mob attacked the police. The police was attacked by the mob. Here, we could even just say the police was attacked and just delete by the mob. What will happen in the first example? The mob attacked the police. Clearly, the responsibility of attacking is on the mob. And if I'm not mistaken, most of us will look at the mob as aggressive. We do not think much of the police, but it is the mob which becomes the focus of attention over here. But look at the second one. The police was attacked, maybe attacked by the mob. It is the vulnerability of the police. It is the position that the police could be attacked by the mob, which becomes more important. So the news item is supposed to be talking about the police, not the mob which attacked. It is basically the situation of the police, which is a concern of the people who are giving out that news. The two other examples I have, the fetus and the unborn child. Actually, I don't have time to discuss, but I have taken this from a kind of extended discussion we had a few years ago, 2-3 years maybe. I don't know how many of you will remember. There was a case where a woman was 7 months pregnant, and in her beyond 7 months, I don't remember exactly, it was found out, it was discovered that the child had a very faulty spinal cord. And there was an extensive discussion where there was debates about whether the court should allow the abortion or not. There were group of people who are saying that they should allow the abortion because the child will be born helpless, will remain helpless all her life. And the other group said we cannot allow abortion. Now, it was very interesting to see this discussion has very interesting points. But one interesting point which I wanted to quote here was the group which was talking about allowing the abortion to happen, or allowing that, I don't know whether we can call it abortion at this point, allowing the child to be removed at this point, were continuously referring to it as a fetus. I think it was not the 7th month, it was the 4-month plus pregnancy. In the 7th month, I think it's no longer called the fetus. I'm not very sure. But they were referring to the pregnancy as the fetus. And the people who did not want the abortion, they were continuously referring to it as the unborn child. Now, definitely when you call something a fetus, you have a more technical association with it. You do not think of it as a live, breathing child in the womb. Whereas the unborn child brings in a lot more emotional associations, which evokes a kind of response which makes abortion much more difficult. So look at the use of the two words, the unborn child and the fetus. At one level could mean the same thing, but when you want to invoke different kinds of responses, you use different words for different purposes. Two more examples. I will not go into the details of these. It's a statement about the dwindling population in the drought-stricken villages of India. To talk about this, it was told there were no able-bodied people around. They had all left hunting for work, leaving the old, the women, and the children behind. Do you find a problem in this? Critical thinking. Evaluate the statement. Not just evaluate, analyze, and then evaluate. There were no able-bodied people. But who are being defined as the able-bodied people eventually? Not the old, young and old men and women, not the men, and not the women, sorry, and not the children. So which means we are trying to say that the women, the adult women also have been kept out of the category of able-bodied people around. But when you look at the kind of statistics we find around people who work in the fields, they'll tell you that it is women who do more of the physical work in the fields than even the men do. If you look at construction sites, it is the women who have to walk around lifting the weight from one point to the other, whereas the men just place the weight on the containers on which they're carried. I'm not saying that women do more hard work always, but completely separating the women from the category of the able-bodied definitely is problematic. I'm sure all of you, men and women, will agree to this. This is how a structure is built, an implication which forms part of evaluation and analysis is created in a sentence. And very often we try to emphasize ideologies. We try to make ideologies stronger in the society. The other one, you could think of it as very political, which is a part of George Bush's speech after 9/11 when he said, "This is a war against America. This is a war against humanity. Either you are with us or you are against us in this war against terror." No harm in his constructing, in his calling terror as terror. But look at how humanity has been constructed. Who are the people included in the humanity? And look at this statement also, either you are with us or against us in this war against terror. Look at the kind of division that is being almost, what do I say, almost threateningly constructed, where you don't have the chance to be neutral. You don't have the chance to think that I do not want to be part of this at all. Think of certain implications of this kind of a statement, this kind of a situation. Very often we are put in this kind of a situation where a statement, a way of expression puts us in one side or the other, and does not give us a chance of being on the other side also, because according to this statement, if you are going to be part of humanity, you have to be with us. That is the implication of the statement. And this definitely belongs to the, in Bloom's taxonomy, probably it will be understanding, it will be evaluating, it will be analyzing also. Think of it, think of how it operates. I wanted to talk a little about understanding literature, but I don't think we have the time for it. I'll skip that. And I'll leave you with this final slide of mine where I'm talking about Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, who talked about critical thinking extensively and who thought dialogic education is very much responsible for building up critical thinking in students, who thought that students should bring in what they can into the classroom setting, into the discussion setting. Only then will be able to escape what he calls the banking system of education. This is very interesting. The banking system of education is like, the teachers should not, the student should not be thought of as a person who has no bank account, and the teachers as people who should be putting in, knowledge into the account of the students. No, that cannot be education according to him. According to him, education can happen only when we take what the students know and what the teachers have to say, enter into a dialogic process, and carry on with her education. And only then teaching, learning can become a process which leads us to freedom. I will not talk more about this anymore because I realize I have very less time to take questions. I think I'll stop over here, and thank you. I'll be glad to take on your questions. Hello.
Good morning, ma'am, and good morning, participants. And
Yes.
ma'am, as we could see that there are a good number of questions comes in, right? And one of them is, how would you describe critical thinking? Is it thinking out of box?
Okay. How would I
How would you
describe?
describe critical thinking? Is it thinking out of the box?
Yes, in a way, yes. Thinking out of the box. But I must tell you that nothing comes absolutely out of the box.
No.
What comes out of the box also depends on what are the things which have been put inside. So critical thinking also will involve how we are able to understand the things which are available, how we are able to evaluate, how we are able to draw a conclusion. Yes, out of the box to the extent where we do not go by the stereotyped responses and we
Mhm.
come up with something new with the way we are able to put together things that will form part of again what we call creative thinking or evaluating and doing creative thinking. To a certain extent, at certain times, it is out of the box, but again, I would say out of the box in this, not always out of the box, but sometimes looking at the available things and analyzing what it is also part of creative thinking. But out of the box, definitely yes.
Yeah, ma'am. Continuing with the same, there is a question which relates with the same answer. If critical thinking is being creative, then how can we evaluate such critical thinking? As your first slide, that is about Boom's,
Taxonomy.
from where
Yes.
it comes. If
Yeah.
critical thinking is being creative, then
Hmm.
how can we evaluate such critical thinking
As
process?
I told you during my talk, I do not think critical thinking is only being creative. Understanding, applying,
Yeah.
analyzing, and evaluating is also part of critical thinking. Uh, creativity is only one part of critical thinking. And if you're thinking of evaluating creativity, I do not think creativity needs to be evaluated. We can evaluate application, we can evaluate analysis, we can evaluate understanding. But creative thinking is something that need not be evaluated. But the fact that somebody is able to come up with creative, response in itself is a proof that there is critical thinking. Am I clear?
Yeah, ma'am. Ma'am, one
Yes.
more question. Does
Yeah.
grammar translation method permitted at UG standard?
A
Does,
complex question. Yes and no. Mm, grammar translation method, definitely the way
yeah.
it was thought of in the classical teaching mode is out now, and we have come up with different teaching methods. But then when you think of it, not grammar translation in the way it was being done in the classical way, but if I can call it bilingual teaching, has come up in a very big way now. And it is being advocated as one of the things which are necessary, one of the things which is desirable. In fact, it is even believed that bilingual thinking can lead to better evaluation and better creativity. So if you think of grammar translation method only in the way in which it was thought of, conceived in the traditional teaching mode, maybe it is out now. But instead of that, bilingual teaching, multilingual teaching, translanguaging, code meshing, these are concepts which have come up um, recently, and I think they are wonderful concepts which think of the entire second, which completely redefine second language teaching process.
Yeah, ma'am.
Like,
Going with one more question.
does
Does
it
critical thinking does critical thinking talks about language competency or literary advancement in writing like novel, poem, or short stories?
again, one cannot have language competence without having critical thinking. The moment you are competent in your language, as Canale and Swain's thing will show, strategic language competence, which is critical thinking, is part of language competence. Okay. And at the same time, if you are able to do creative writing, also it is a kind of critical thinking. So critical thinking will involve both. It will involve creative writing and also strategic language competence, which is what I have tried to show in this slide of mine. Go back to this slide.
Well, could you assist with some of the activities that can be exercised or practiced at UG level for enlightening critical thinking process?
Yeah, critical thinking. One can always when it comes to writing,
Yeah.
something as simple as putting giving a set of sentences which are jumbled and which will have several right answers for example. There is not only one clear-cut way of putting these sentences in order. They can be put in order in 2 or 3 different ways, and giving students these sentences, finding out what kind of an order they put it in, and asking them to justify why they think that kind of an order is right. Okay, and how they perceive the organization of the paragraph, right, with that kind of an order, is very much a part of evaluation. Okay.
One
uh,
last one.
yeah,
Last question
yeah.
from the audience. That is, social linguistic competency has any role to play with interpersonal skills?
Social linguistic competence has got a very important role to play in interpersonal skills. It teaches you, it's supposed to teach you what is right, when, where, for whom. Okay, but interpersonal skills are also very closely dependent on things like repairing communication, multimodality, and problem solving. When I say multimodality, I mean body language, I mean non-verbal communication. These also form very important part of socio-linguistic competence. So it is interpersonal. Interpersonal communication is part of social-linguistic competence, but at times, interpersonal communication also heavily depends on strategic competence. These are all interlinked, overlapping concepts. Please do not think of them as watertight compartments.
Thank you, ma'am. There are few more questions. We will mail you and you can address them. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita ma'am, for very
Thank you.
clearly answering the queries of the participants. I now request Mrs. Mamta Vaidya ma'am, the head of the department and coordinator of the webinar, to propose the vote of thanks.
Good morning, all of you. I am here to propose vote of thanks. I am Ms. Mamata Vaidya, Head Department English, Badruka College of Commerce and Arts. First and foremost, I would like to thank Dr. Sunita Mishra, for readily agreeing for today's webinar and enlightening the teachers globally on teaching language using different tools. I mentioned globally here as we have participants from outside India too. Personally, I have been associated with Dr. Sunita Mishra for last 30 years, but today we have developed a professional relationship which I am sure will continue for a long time. I thank our secretary, Sri Mukunlal Ji Badruka, for supporting and organizing our webinars continuously. I also thank our Director General, Mr. Abhirama Krishna, for addressing today's session and also continuously supporting us in organizing the webinars. I thank K. Anupama, Vice Principal and Convener of the session, for contacting the resource persons and arranging the webinar. I thank Mrs. Srimani and Mr. Shaila Prasad for their support and cooperation. I thank Mr. Hayat Basha and Mr. Nazir for technical support. I thank all my colleagues for their support and good wishes throughout. And finally, I thank all the participants for participating actively and making the webinar successful. I thank all of you once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mamta.
Thank you, Sunita.